Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Rantevi, an EMS Medical Director in South Florida and a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital. Thanks for joining me today to discuss the important topic of transport safety in EMS. While today's topic focuses on the pediatric population, it's important to remember that the topic is applicable to all ages, and it really includes all of our personnel. When I first became an EMS Medical Director in 2010, one of our ambulances was struck by a semi-trailer tow truck, and it permanently injured one of our best paramedics. It's an event that's impacted my work in EMS ever since. This short video will inform you on the topic, which is the first step. But then I would encourage you to take this information and inform your staff, and also ensure that you have the correct equipment on your vehicles to ensure that the best practices can be followed. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, between 1992 and 2011, there were about 12 ambulance crashes per day. Most crashes resulted in property damage, about 1/3 resulted in injuries, and 1% resulted in fatalities. Is it surprising to you that the emergency vehicle operator is killed in 1 of 25 fatal ambulance crashes? Well, it turns out that ambulance passengers are at a 5 times greater risk of dying than the emergency vehicle operator. Occupants in other vehicles are at 15 times greater risk of dying than the emergency vehicle operator. So let's talk now about how many children are involved. Of the 23,714 vehicle occupants killed in 2016 crashes, 826 or 3% were children. Based on known restraint use, 289 of 826 or 38% of child fatalities were unrestrained. What do these facts tell you about the responsibility that you have when driving an ambulance? Well, you may already know that the majority of MVCs involving ambulances occur on clear days with good visibility and dry roads. Furthermore, most occur in intersections during the daylight hours. It's the MVCs in intersections that have the highest rate of severity, with head-on MVCs being the deadliest. Now, what about running hot? You also know this at Code 3 or red lights and sirens. Well, according to NHTSA, 70% of ambulance collisions happen while operating with lights and sirens.
Code 3.
Code 3.
Code 3.
Code 3 for a fall.
So 3 to St. Paul's, nice and easy though, okay?
Absolutely. Feel free to light it up.
Hang on, everybody.
There's driver training, but nothing prepares you for the real thing. This is gonna take some finessing.
It's not the safest thing. If you need to do it, you need to do it. It's a necessary evil. It's intense.
Use the horn, maybe. Now he's got you.
There we go.
Probably the most stressful part of this job is actually driving Code 3 around other drivers.
Oh, where's he going?
Oh, he nailed it though.
He did.
It's stressful driving Code 3, trying to avoid traffic and people jumping out at you and stuff.
That person just started walking anyway.
Doesn't pay attention, he's got earbuds
No.
You know, the good rule is just don't trust anyone and, drive very defensively and cautiously.
Just imagine there's a glass 3/4 fill sitting on your dashboard and you can't spill it.
Well, now let's transition into seatbelt use. Listen, emergency or not, every occupant in the ambulance should always use seatbelts while in motion. Your organizational policies require restraint use, and if you are the emergency vehicle operator, it's your responsibility for ensuring occupant restraint use. Failure to provide the restraint system creates risk for all occupants, whether they're restrained or not. Caregivers and other occupants become projectiles, endangering themselves and others. And remember, injuries occur in a patient care compartment without an actual collision. Some examples include sudden evasive maneuvers, curb strikes, aggressive braking, unanticipated cornering, and slips and falls.
Welcome to the Stryker Stretcher Use and Maintenance Training video. The purpose of this video is to provide a step-by-step best practices technique which will help prevent and reduce injuries when operating the stretcher currently assigned to the HFD transport unit.
Best practice. It is best practice to install fully charged batteries into the Stryker stretcher at the start of each shift. The light located underneath the stretcher will indicate green or amber. Green means the battery is charged. Amber indicates the battery is low and should be replaced. A fully charged battery should last 18 to 20 full ups and downs. An amber light should last 5 to 6 ups and downs. Your charger will be stored at the station with your spare battery charging on it at all times. Removing the stretcher. When removing the Stryker stretcher from the back of the ambulance, first unhook it from the ambulance locking mechanism. Once the stretcher is free from the antlers, pull it towards you until it catches the safety hook, and squeeze the handbrake on the lower right side of the stretcher. There is also a positive button that extends the legs of the stretcher. The button is located on the lift handle on the lower right side. The leg assembly will drop down away from the stretcher and make contact with the ground. As the stretcher exits the ambulance, a safety catch bar located on the bottom of the head end of the Stryker cot will catch the safety hook located on the floor of the back of the ambulance. The apparatus will be almost completely out of the ambulance. All you have to do is lift the red handle on the safety catch bar from the safety hook located on the floor of the ambulance. Once the stretcher is free, it can move freely away from the ambulance. Loading the stretcher with patient. First, always load the Stryker stretcher into the ambulance with 2 operators. The loading of the stretcher with a patient requires that the operators work in tandem to lift correctly and safely. When approaching the ambulance with the stretcher, operators should be on both sides of the cot. Once the stretcher's safety catch bar engages the safety hook located on the floor of the ambulance, the operator should spread their feet, have their shoulders parallel to the stretcher, and have their inside shoes pushed up against the others. They will lift the Stryker unit together, and then the operator on the right side will activate or push the negative button located on the right-hand side of the undercarriage on the lift handle of the stretcher. When the operators lift the stretcher, they must lift together using their legs and not their backs. Once the stretcher is level with the ambulance, the operator on the right-hand side is responsible for retracting the legs of the Stryker cot. The legs will electronically retract when the operator pushes the negative sign button located on the lower right side of the stretcher. After the legs retract, operators must walk together in a slow, forward motion, moving the cot into the ambulance. Once the cot is safely inside the ambulance, the stretcher can be locked into place, securing the stretcher and the patient. Unloading the stretcher with patient. After opening the rear doors of the ambulance, unhitch the Stryker stretcher from the antler system by pushing the red push bar forward. That will disengage the stretcher from the antlers. When removing the patient and stretcher from the ambulance, the operators must assist each other in order to remove the cot safely and efficiently. As both medics pull the cot out of the back of the ambulance, the first operator, located on the right near the controls, will press the down or positive button located on the lower right side. This will allow the legs of the stretcher to extend toward the ground. Once the wheels of the Stryker unit are securely on the ground, the safety catch bar will prevent the Stryker stretcher from being completely removed from the ambulance. The second operator will then have to lift the red safety handle located on the safety catch bar upwards to remove the catch bar from the safety hook. Once the catch is unlatched, the operator can easily remove the stretcher from the ambulance. The operators are both free to assist with the patient and cot. Stretcher maintenance. Procedure for requesting maintenance or replacing a broken stretcher during business hours. Number 1. notify your ambulance supervisor. Number 2, contact EMS Reserve Ambulance Barn at 832-395-8580. Once again, that's 832-395-8580. Number 3, the person in the barn will instruct the unit with recommendations on how to proceed. A, if the stretcher can be repaired by HFD personnel, the repairs may be made and the unit will go back into service. Or B, if the stretcher needs to be repaired by the Stryker service technician, the unit will be issued a loaner stretcher. Or C, the unit will be contacted by Reserve Barn personnel when the repairs have been completed. Procedure for replacing a broken stretcher after hours and weekends. Number 1, notify your ambulance supervisor. Number 2, the supervisor should have a reserve stretcher in his or her station that will be assigned to replace the broken stretcher. Number 3, the unit must document what is broken or what item needs repaired. This must be left with the stretcher at the time the unit receives a loaner stretcher. 4, the supervisor will notify the Reserve Barn personnel during regular business hours. The supervisor will then contact the unit whose broken stretcher he or she has and instruct them to return the loaner stretcher to the station and pick up their broken stretcher and deliver it to the Reserve Ambulance Barn. Number 5, Reserve Barn personnel will repair the stretcher if possible so the unit can return to service or will issue a loaner stretcher. 6, the unit will be contacted by Reserve Barn personnel when the repairs have been completed.
We created this demonstration video for you to use as a learning tool. Using the techniques described in the video, your chance of injury will be greatly reduced. Remember that the proper reporting, repair, and maintenance are key to the safe operations of the stretcher. Thank you for your participation.
Now, before I get into pediatric-specific transport, I want to cover some basic patient safety points. For the safety of the patient stretcher must completely be secure in its mounts. Ideally, the patient faces rearward and their head should be elevated when medically appropriate. The stretcher is the preferred patient location because the patient can be sitting up instead of side-facing on the bench seat. Okay, now let's discuss pediatric transport in more detail. We know that children present a unique set of challenges to transport safety in an ambulance. EMS practitioners cannot be complacent in using properly placed restraint devices designed for children. But there are certainly challenges related to restraining pediatric patients. First, the stretcher is made for adults. And because children come in all heights and weights, it makes things more difficult and requires us to carry additional child safety equipment. Secondly, and perhaps the biggest issue, is that when we are transporting children, we have a tendency to want to keep them comfortable, especially when they're crying and not being able to be held by mom and dad. I know this is difficult, and even more difficult if you have children that same age. But remember, leaving children unrestrained in our vehicles is an unsafe practice. The national recommendations are as follows. Number 1, use properly sized child restraint devices. Second, fully secure child restraint systems per the manufacturer's guidelines. And third, ensure that all occupants are restrained when in motion. It sounds simple. Let's talk about what not to do. Don't transport children who are not patients. Instead, use alternate transportation in a passenger vehicle when it's available. Next, don't allow parents, caregivers, EMS practitioners, or other passengers to be unrestrained during the transport. And finally, don't allow the pediatric patient to be held during transport. Now, while we are securing every person in our vehicle, we can't forget about securing all the other things we carry in EMS. We love our stuff. We continually add new equipment to better care for our patients, but could do better when securing those items. Unsecured equipment is a projectile hazard, increasing risk of injury to all ambulance occupants. And additionally, unsecured equipment is frequently damaged even with normal vehicle operations. So make every effort to secure equipment with brackets and straps to prevent injuries. Here are some important things to remember. Don't leave hard or heavy items unsecured while in motion, and avoid having unnecessary items in the patient compartment. Also, please don't secure monitors or oxygen bottles with restraints intended for your patient. Ultimately, try not to get complacent. Laptops, portable radios, and other small hard items can be deadly projectiles. Next, I'd like to talk about the types of pediatric transport products available for ground ambulances. This is a question I get all the time from people around the country. The good news is there's a complete spreadsheet of pediatric transport products available on the NASEMSO website. NASEMSO is the National Association of EMS Officials, and they have put out a lot of emphasis on pediatric transport safety over the years. Of course, they do not endorse a specific product, but it's worth a review if you're in the market for one of these devices. The spreadsheet is separated to two broad categories. The first is for children who are not sick and they're uninjured, which you can see here. The second broad category is for children who are sick and injured, which is of course what we're interested in. You can see this list here. Note that each product is rated for children within specific weight ranges, so please be aware of these limitations. There are two main things to consider for the product you select. First, most systems prefer a product that is easy to use and can be deployed rapidly. Secondly, the device you carry ideally will not take up too much space when being stored. If the product's too cumbersome or too complicated to use, you may find that your EMS personnel avoid using it when the time comes. NHTSA's Office of EMS put out a very detailed document that's worth the read as well. It lists the ideal options for 5 different situations that you will encounter as an EMS professional in the field. It also lists the options that should be considered when the ideal options are not practical or possible. As an example, for a child who is ill or injured and whose condition does not require continuous intensive medical monitoring or interventions, the ideal recommendation is to transport the child in a size-appropriate child restraint system. But if that's not possible, the other options listed are to either transport in the forward-facing EMS provider seat or captain's chair, or in the rear-facing EMS provider seat or captain's chair in a size-appropriate child restraint that complies with federal regulations. This could be a convertible child seat, for example. Ultimately, the key goal is to appropriately secure children during transport in your vehicle. I want to highlight the state of Florida EMS. I want to highlight the state of Florida's EMSC. It's led by Dr. Phyllis Hendry. The EMSC can provide your agency with a number of useful resources related to safe patient transport of children. Interestingly, Florida's 2017 annual EMS agency survey estimated that 22% of EMS agencies do not currently have a policy or protocol in place for safe EMS transport of children. I'd like to end this with an impactful infographic that was created by NHTSA after 20 years of data collection. Take a look. With an average of 4,500 vehicle crashes involving ambulances each year, 34% resulted in injuries and an average of 33 deaths. Note that 84% of EMS professionals were not restrained in the patient compartment. And note in the graph to the left how much more severe the injuries were for those not restrained. So when it comes to our patients, only 33% were secured correctly with the shoulder and lap restraints, and 44% of patients were ejected from the cot in serious crashes. So please be sure to correctly understand how to secure patients to the cot using both the shoulder and lap restraints, as it could make the difference between life and death for your patient. I hope that this presentation provided you with the information you need to educate others and to equip your ambulances with the correct equipment. You have a difficult job that is dangerous in so many ways. Taking the time to protect yourself and those you care for will go a long way in ensuring that you have a long and healthy career. I want to personally thank you for all the work you do for the residents of our communities. Thank you.